Welcome to Charles Dickens' A Brain on Fire, a series that digs deep into the life and works of one of the greatest novelists of all time. Hi everyone. Today's guest is a screenwriting legend. His work not only sets an intimidating benchmark for anyone wishing to adapt a literary classic, but it has truly inspired thousands of people to read and immerse themselves in the works of Jane Austen, Tolstoy, Victor Hugo, Thackeray, George Eliot, and of course, Charles Dickens. Our guest wrote the definitive screen adaptations of Bleak House, starring Gillian Anderson, and Pride and Prejudice, starring Colin Firth and Jennifer Ely. Most recently, he adapted Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy, and completed Jane Austen's unfinished novel in his series of Sanditon. Right now, his sights are set on America, with his upcoming adaptation of John Updike's Rabbit Run. So, as you settle down by the fireside, or strike out on a leafy walk in the woods over this Halloween weekend, I thought it would be really fun to talk to the inimitable Andrew Davies, particularly since his breakthrough came back in the December of 1976 with his stunning adaptation of The Signalman. Andrew, hello and welcome to Charles Dickens' A Brain on Fire.
Pleasure to be here.
How much do you remember of 1976 and starting work on The Signalman?
Oh, actually, yeah, I've got quite a few recollections of that. It was the idea of the producer, Rosemary Hill, who was a producer with a very specialised taste, really. She used to do a lot of rather arty programmes, and she did a series of different diaries. She did a diary of a nobody, and she did Kilvert's diary, and anyway, then she got this little series of half-hour ghost stories, and offered me The Signalman, which I'd never read. So it was a very interesting story. I think I never quite fully understood the story, and I'm not sure that I understand it now. But I just kind of went for it and gave it my best shot. Really, I can remember one thing about it, that I caught a glimpse of the accounts of the production when I was there, and I got paid less than they spent on the scaffolding for the signal box. I think I got paid 500, and the scaffolding was 560 or something. But it was exciting being there on location. And at one point, I'd just gone right down the tunnel to have a look, and actually I hadn't realised the train was about to come through, and it did, and I managed to sort of press myself into a niche in the wall while this train puffed through, and I came out of the tunnel. When they finished the shot and everything, and I said, God, that was exciting. And everybody fell about laughing because I was completely black with soot from the train. So those are my main memories of the experience, except that it was a great pleasure to do it. And it was wonderful to work with Denham Elliott, really, who brought such an interesting vibe to it.
Yes, he was a fantastic signalman, wasn't he? And that's an extraordinary story of being in the tunnel. I mean, it could have been a near end to your career before it had really taken off.
Right. That's right.
I think it's
ever heard of me except as the man who got run over by the steam train while trying to do some filming. Yeah.
Yes, it's a wonderful adaptation. It's so powerful to watch now, I think. The setting and the weather really lent itself perfectly, didn't it? Were you there for the entire shoot? Do you remember? Or
I think I was there for most of it. Yeah, and it's so interesting that It was kind of creepy because there's a drop of several degrees in temperature when you go down from the top into the
Yes.
cupping, and so you get the sense that you're in a different creepy world down there.
I'm curious by what you say. You've admitted to finding the Signalman quite hard to understand in some aspects, and I find that too. I feel as though there's nothing funny in Dickens's writing here, nothing intentionally funny about it. It's as if
No,
he's holding on to the story, keeping it close to his chest because it's traumatic for him.
yeah, it's a very untypical Dickens story. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no jolly characterization or anything that you say, and the dialogue is very kind of stark and repetitive in a good way.
Yes.
That the repetitions reinforce each other. Yeah, it was a bit of luck to get that piece, really, and I'm kind of amazed and proud that it's survived so long, and it still gets repeats. And that's actually quite a few of those half-hour ghost stories do
Yes.
from that period.
Had you done many adaptations of
No,
classics
no,
up to that point? No.
not at all. No, in those days, you started your career, or I did, and a lot of writers did, doing entirely original work, one-off plays, really drawn from one's own experience. And once you've done a few of those, if you were lucky and proved yourself reliable and you could turn in the script, et cetera, that they'd start giving you adaptations. And yes, so I started in the late 60s, and it was really the late 70s before I was regularly getting asked to adapt substantial things.
What I'm very impressed by with your work is from the outset, you seem to have the confidence to grab the material, change it, do what you need to do to make it work for the screen. And I hope you don't mind me reading back one of your lines here from the Signalman, which I was astonished by, which is where the Signalman is saying, "A tunnel collision is the worst to be feared. Your nightmares would go hard to equal it. The wreckage becomes hideously compressed in the confined space. If fire breaks out, the tunnel and its ventilating shafts become furnace flues. You cannot see in the dark to get to the wreckage and the bodies. The screams of the injured and dying echo in a most persistent way." And I just thought that's an astonishing line. I thought it was an astonishing line of Dickens. And of course it isn't. It's yours.
Oh, isn't it?
No, that's you.
That's me, is it? God.
Well, you see, but that's extraordinary, isn't it? Because I wonder throughout your career, people would have go, so you do adaptations then as a writer. Adaptations is your thing, as if you're not called upon to draw from every single skill as a writer to be able to bring text into things.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess right from the outset, I was embellishing or improving upon the original.
Absolutely. I feel like with that section, you go where Dickens doesn't seem to be able to. He sort of falls short a little bit in his own story of being able to quite do that. And I wondered if you had any guiding principles when you approach adaptations of any writer, Austen, Tolstoy, or Dickens.
I suppose mostly I'm doing quite big things, so how you structure the whole thing becomes very important. But simple questions I ask myself, like, whose story is this really? And whose point of view do we want to see the story from? And sometimes there, I'll make some changes because an easy example of Pride and Prejudice, which is told entirely from Elizabeth's point of view. And I think one of the big differences I did was that I wrote quite a lot of scenes. I just thought, well, what is Darcy doing now when all this is going on? How does he feel about all this? And so I wrote some scenes, quite a few of them, that take us into Darcy's mind so that we get a chance to experience his feelings. I'd say that, yeah, those are my general principles.
Yes, and I wondered if there's something else, whether you do this consciously or subconsciously, but I feel that very often what is implied in the original text by the writer, you then show on screen. There are things that you have to put out there for clarity and for tension and excitement and drama.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, you put it so well.
But for example, the face that appears in the Signalman, the white face, that's extraordinary. How did you come to devise that in your mind?
I suppose I've just tried to imagine it for myself, and probably I had some notion of Monk's scream at the back of my mind when I was thinking about it. And I think the woman in the story, I made her into a bride, and she wasn't a bride in the story, but I just thought it would be more visually powerful and
yes,
poignant, really.
Yes. But you're talking about whose story is it? In the case of the Signalman, it's about the Signalman, isn't it, in the original, but it's very much from the point of view of the traveller, the narrator.
That's true. And I think that's what I meant by saying I wasn't sure I really understood it, because I think Dickens is really trying to imply that the traveller has been led there for a purpose, and that what he's going through is something that he needs to experience, that he's as much in the story as the signalman himself. He's not just reporting a story that's told him by a man who's had a terrible experience. He kind of becomes part of it. And the signalman feels that he is, and that this visitor has been sent for some kind of purpose, but you never quite understand what it is. And I think that makes it more powerful in a way. And so I thought, well, let's just present it. Let's not try and offer some neat kind of explanation or interpretation. That's I suppose, the great thing about a ghost story. Although I don't believe in ghosts at all myself, but the thing
no, but I'm not sure Dickens did, but he was fascinated by them, wasn't he? But yeah. Where and when did Dickens first come into your life?
Oh, I read some when I was a kid, but there were like children's versions of a lot of the books, abridged or made simple for children. So I'd read things like a version of David Copperfield and a version of Oliver Twist when I was little. And it was interesting that when I was in university, Dickens was kind of unfashionable in academic circles. I think it was largely Leavis's, F.R. Leavis, who was maybe not. He was a very dominant literary critic in those days, and he didn't feel that Dickens was wholly worth the serious attention of somebody of high moral purpose, etc., etc. He tried to establish a great tradition that went through Jane Austen, Henry James, etc. And Dickens didn't quite make it because he was too much of an entertainer. So anyway, I'm saying that I suppose that was why I never studied him at university or really taught him very much when I was teaching. But I did go in for quite a big Dickens reading jag. I think in about the 70s, I got some of the really huge old 19th century editions. I remember very cumbersome. I used to read them in the loo, I think. So I then properly read things like Little Dorrit and Dombey and Son and some of the slightly lesser known great things. And then did go on, I remember, to teach Bleak House. Quite difficult to get students to read all these things.
Yes.
I used to teach at Warwick University. So I did get hooked on Dickens, so that I was really excited to get the chance to adapt a couple of them.
Yes.
I really wanted to do Dombey and Son as well, but came up against one of those things, regime change at the BBC, suddenly saying, "Oh, we don't think we want another Dickens," or not. A gloomy, obscure one like Dombey and Son.
Yes, if you'd said Great Expectations, we'll go, yes, let's have 29 more of those.
Exactly. But it is a great story, though. Great.
I love. It's actually my favourite. It's such an obvious choice, but I absolutely love it. I think for the reader, Pip's story is your story. It really cuts through, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's something that almost everyone can identify.
Yes.
Well, the childhood thing. I remember seeing the David Lean film when I was about 10 or 11, and it scared me shitless. That bit at the beginning where convict just grabs him, and I fell in love with Stella in that old version. I thought she was lovely, and I did used to fall in love with little girls at a very early age. I was quite romantic. It's partly because of this reading that I'd done, I guess, really, and going to see films like that. I was a great reader of Tom Sawyer. Do you know that book?
I don't. Do you know, I haven't read that at all.
It's one of those boys' books that it's mostly kind of a boys' adventures, but it's one of the few authors of popular books for children that acknowledges girls and the romantic feelings that boys could have about them. And I sort of lapped that up. Anyway, that's a bit off the...
No, not at all. So teaching Bleak House, did that equip you then for the huge task of adapting it for television?
It did help greatly, because I remember thinking, teaching it, reading it and talking about it, that if I'd been writing it, I thought I wouldn't go about it like this, because what he tends to do is introduce a bunch of characters, a little group of characters, and he'll go with them for a bit, and he'll start with yet another bunch of characters, and you think, oh, right, the story's going to really start now. But no, I mean, he takes you into another milieu. And I thought, well, teaching this, and reading it even, it's frustrating at the same time as it's entertaining, because you're guessing the whole time how these different stories are going to relate to each other, but he takes his time about bringing them together. And I thought, when I came to adapt it, I thought, I'm going to start all the stories simultaneously. And it was interesting that Jane Tranter, who was head of drama at the time, was sort of challenging me to think of a original way of adapting Bleak House. And I thought it would be fun to do it in half-hour episodes. And it actually went out in the slot after EastEnders. And I thought, well, we can learn from the EastEnders, because one of the things I liked about EastEnders was, if you're in Albert Square, you get characters crossing at the back of each other's stories in a way, and that Lincoln's Inn area of London, such a lot of the story takes part there, so that you would be following one character. You can make them bump into a stranger in the street, and then you would go with that stranger and leave your original character to carry on their merry way and begin to establish the connections between all the stories. There's probably lots of other ways of adapting it, but that was the way I went at it.
There were some very interesting things that I took from watching it again. If you read the novel, a character like Harold Skimpole comes across better in the early parts of the novel. The man who pretends to be a child all the time, he comes across better, I think, in the early parts of the novel, whereas in your adaptation, you can see the camera catches the calculation in his face and the manipulation. And similarly with Alan Armstrong as Bucket, he seems more shady at the start. You believe that he's possibly more in cahoots with Tulkinghorn and he's not going to be a good guy
Yes.
What led you to those decisions there?
I honestly can't remember.
Except for say it works brilliantly, so dramatically. I think that's what serves it so well.
Yeah, I would imagine that what it was that, on first reading, that I thought this is a very strange sort of police inspector, and let's go with this. Let's let the audience feel the strangeness before you eventually come to trust Bucket's intuitions.
Yes.
But it's a slow process, and quite nice to have a policeman that. Of course, endless shows now of policemen you can't trust.
Yeah.
But it was a bit less common in the days when I did Bleak House.
Yes. What I love about that adaptation as well is how claustrophobic it feels. Lots of very, very close shots on everybody. Gillian Anderson as Lady Deadlock, for example, you see every twitch and every spasm.
The director, whose name I'm fumbling for.
Justin Chadwick and Susanna White.
It was Justin who started it off and kind of gave it its style.
Yes.
He'd been directing quite a few spooks episodes, and he loved using handheld cameras and kind of getting right into the action, so that it's almost like the camera's another person in the scene, sort of roving round. And he'd rehearse on camera and start shooting when the actors thought they were just rehearsing, so as to get this kind of immediacy into it. It's almost like a war movie or something like that the camera is getting in so tight. And I love that, actually. And it's quite odd that on the strength of Bleak House, everybody loved his work on that. He got quite a lot of stuff, but he never seemed to use the same techniques again. And the films that he did tended to be quite staid and stodgy, and they didn't have that kind of
that sort of rapid motion. Yes,
yeah. But he was very influential, and Susanna White, picked up the same style and reaped great rewards for it, because, of course, all the stories came to a climax in the later bits of the series.
I remember at the time a lot was made of the new HD camera technology that they were employing, and so all those very fast shutter effects and Mrs. Barbary standing at the end of a corridor in a flashback and all of that, kept it very exciting and unpredictable.
It was.
How easy is it for you as a writer to let go of your draft once you've submitted it?
When I'm writing the draft, I try to write it so that it can really only be shot in one way, But then, paradoxically, what I like is if the director will surprise me, as Justin did, indeed, and that, and do things differently, but in a good way that's even better. So I always think of the read-through as the classic handover time. I like going to the read-through, and I like trying to influence, and I like to read the stage directions in a read-through and dictate the pace of how the thing is going. And then from that moment on, I think, there's not a lot I can do. It's really over to the director and the actors, and I do go to the location, but not a lot. And basically, I just go and say, I've been watching the rushes. You're all wonderful. Is it time for lunch now? So I'm usually pretty happy. Of course, if it's getting done in a way that I don't like, it's very frustrating. But you can't change things much once it's underway. You have to let it happen, and you have to let the director have his creative input and his vision or her vision.
Do you have much influence on casting decisions, or do you have to let that go?
These days.
Yeah.
I do get quite involved in that. Of course, one doesn't always get the person one wants because often they actually turn the part down or they're not available or whatever. But it is helpful anyway to the director if I'm making casting suggestions because he can see what kind of actor, what kind of performance I've got in mind. But yeah, we all love casting anyway, don't we? Think of your favourite actors and dream about having them in things. A lot of these big 19th century classics have very young leading characters, and you can be there right at the start of some big careers, as happened in Bleak House. Now I've forgotten her name.
Well, Carrie Mulligan, a very young
Carrie
Carrie Mulligan.
That's right. She had been in that Keira Knightley film of Pride and Prejudice, but in a very small part. But it was thrilling to see her and meet her right at the beginning of her career. And she was, in a way, through inexperience, she used to have quite a lot of trouble breathing. She was excited. She'd run out of breath in the middle of a sentence, partly because she was excited and she was playing a girl who was excitable and in love. And so it all worked, and it felt very real when she was doing that. But it was also very interesting to see her watching all the more experienced actors and learning all the time. And she's become such an exceptionally gifted and subtle actress now.
Yeah. I don't imagine you're someone, because you're so much in the game still writing and putting things on, I don't imagine you spend much time looking back. But do you go back to these adaptations every now and then and watch them?
Not very often, no. Pride and Prejudice does get repeated such a lot. We often, my wife and I, would say, "Oh, Pride and Prejudice is on drama or something. Should we just take a peek?" And actually find, you start watching it, you can't stop, you want to watch the whole thing. But no, there's a lot of them that Little Dorrit, for example, I've hardly seen it since it was first on. I meant to have a look at that because I don't remember it awfully well before this, but I never got round to it.
Well, I hope you forgive me. I only just started watching it, so I haven't got through the whole thing, and I've not read the book either. So it's really interesting. I'm getting Little Dorrit purely from your adaptation.
It's a really good story.
It's fantastic. I'm really enjoying it. I think, Bleak House is very dark and claustrophobic, and even though Little Dorrit so far for me is involving the Marshalsea a lot, there's such an open, bright, sunny world that they seem to be moving in.
Yes, that's very interesting, because the mood of the book on the whole is quite dark, because of poor old what's his name, the main character. I mean, is
it Arthur?
Arthur, yes.
Yeah.
That's right. He's really been completely dominated by his mother. I mean, he's a kind of crushed character who kind of emerges really through his relationship with Little Dorrit. He's a wounded character really, who manages to heal himself. But yeah, you're quite right. And of course, it's a big world in Little Dorrit, because it's got these shady European characters and that crazy villain.
Yes. Is that played by Andy Serkis? Is it?
Yes,
Is it Rigard? Have I remembered that right? Is it, or Lanier? Yes.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
He just so enjoyed being that character.
Yes.
He's just got a gift for transforming himself. And have you got to the bit where he actually climbs up the front of a house?
Not yet. No. He did it all by himself. Did he?
Being Andy Serkis, yeah. He wouldn't have it. He did it all himself, yes.
I'm really hooked on it. I think it's fantastic. I think you're very famous for your Bleak House adaptation, but I do think Little Dorrit, oddly, it seems more recently done as well to my eyes. I don't know why that is. It's only about 4 years apart, isn't it? I think from
Yeah.
I saw somewhere that, am I right that you're working on a 6-part Dickens documentary?
Yes, it's not exactly a documentary. It's a drama,
Okay.
a biographical drama, really, but various episodes in Dickens's life. Whether it'll get on, I mean, I've started writing it for Simon Vaughan's independent company, and it's all gone a bit quiet, really. But I just got tremendously involved because having now read, several biographies of Dickens, you realise more and more what an absolutely extraordinary man he was. I mean, that phenomenal self-destructive energy that he had. He's wearing himself to a frazzle from almost day one, and he'd just write all day and then go for a 4-hour walk in the night.
Yes.
Sometimes walk about all night. Absolutely crazy. And some of the things also that he got up to, teaching himself hypnotism and
yes. What possessed him to do that, do you think? What was...
I think he just loved the power of it, that he could something quite sinister about Dickens, I think, as well as, that extraordinary humanity. And he is just so fucking funny as well. And the comic characters in Bleak House are just sensational.
Yeah.
Dreadful old guy who says, "Shake me up, Judy," which is yes.
Smallweed.
It's Smallweed, yes, that's right, Smallweed. And I remember doing with those characters, they have kind of, he in particular, but a lot of them have kind of very particular kind of things that they say in speech rhythms, and I would pick them up and perhaps emphasize them even more than Dickens did, through repetition and so on. And they really did catch on because people were getting ringtones for their phones saying, "Shake me up, Judy, shake me up, Judy."
This has been so lovely talking to you, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time. Do you have any other Dickens adaptations in the works as well? You mentioned Dombey and Son at the start.
I don't know. Well, Dombey and Son was one that I thought I was going to do, and I was all set to start, but then never did. So I still dream of maybe doing it one day, but doesn't look very likely.
On that, though, you're talking about, regime change at the companies and everything, but your longevity is amazing. You must have contemporaries that you were writing, fellow writers from the 60s, 70s that have retired out of it.
Yeah, because, right from when I started it, the settled wisdom was that writing television was very much of a young man's game or a young woman's game, and that beyond 50 you were probably finished. And I think a lot of writers do get kind of stuck in the decade where where they came to maturity or achieved fame. And I noticed that about some directors too. They stayed kind of stuck in the 60s or stuck in the 70s or the 90s or whichever one it was. And I suppose that the trick, if you can do it and have the luck to do it, is to move with the times, I guess, a bit. And of course, adapting 19th century fiction helps with because they're out of date anyway. But in fact, the thing that I've heard a bit, and I think it's really true, is that adaptations very much reflect the time in which they were written.
Yes.
And I don't really feel that about my own. I feel that Pride and Prejudice is as up to date as it ever was. But I'm sure that, a more dispassionate view would see it very much as a 1990s show, and much more of a 1990s show than than an 1810 show, or what, the period it talks about.
Yes, although actually I remember thinking with your Pride and Prejudice that often with other period dramas, you can tell the decade it was made in because the actors have hairstyles from that decade that have been modified to sort of slightly, whereas with Pride and Prejudice, the hair looks completely authentic to what you imagine the 1800s is, or what we know.
That was what we hoped it would, yes, yeah. Certainly.
I suppose more contemporary adaptations take into account more diverse casting. That's a very clear...
Yes, they do, yeah.
And I've heard you talk about the idea of writing strong female characters as well, making sure that your heroines are all strong. And it's very interesting. I come back to Gillian Anderson's portrayal of Lady Dedlock. I mean, no one for a second would say that she wasn't a strong, powerful woman. But at the same time, you get the sheer vulnerability in that fragile state as well when she's put under certain stresses.
Yes.
Which is human, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. These days, nobody will let you write a weak woman these days. They've all got to be strong because all the executives are strong women, you see, and they like themselves to be reflected in these dramas. Yeah.
Yeah, it's harder for the actress, though, playing the part because she can get boxed in.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, Andrew, this has been fantastic. I'd love to talk for several hours, but I'm really aware of your time, and it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Charles Dickens' A Brain on Fire. If you're enjoying these episodes and would like to make a small donation towards the costs of producing them, please follow the link at the bottom of the description and you can make a donation there. Every coffee you buy makes a huge difference. Thank you ever so much, and see you next time.